Start recording. Okay, very good. Good evening, everyone. Um, we're going to be talking about the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks is a period of time that begins with Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the 17th of the month of Tammuz, which was this past Sunday. And it continues on until Tisha B'Av. And technically, the 3 weeks do not actually end, or the period of mourning does not conclude until the day after Tisha B'Av, which is the 10th of the month of Av. The 10th of the month of Av is still considered to be a part of the grand expanse of mourning that we have ritualized. So let's talk a little bit about what exactly is it that we're focusing on. What exactly is the 3 weeks about? What are the themes of the of this period of time? Why is this considered to be an inauspicious moment for the Jewish people? Well, it starts off with Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. Shiva Asar B'Tammuz sets off a historical series of events. And we're going to just read through one portion of the Hajj Guide to the 3 weeks, which is a document that, again, I mentioned earlier. I wrote up a couple of years back. It was sent out on Friday. It's available here in hard copy at the show. We're going to take a look at a few events that take place on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and that'll set the stage for what exactly are the 3 weeks. So on the Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, which is the 17th of the month of Tammuz, and we're looking on page 2 if you're looking on at the document here in present, there were a series of tragedies that befell the Jewish people during the month during this time, on this date. According to the dates that are given in the Torah, according to at least one way of reckoning, one way of understanding them, Moshe broke the two tablets crafted by Hashem at Har Sinai in response to the sin of the golden calf. And that takes place on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. Um, on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the Romans defiled the Holy Temple to humiliate and suppress the Jews. They placed an idol in the sanctuary of the temple, and that also took place on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, on the 17th of the month of Tammuz, which was just this past Sunday. A Roman general, at least according to Josephus, a man by the name of Apostomus, publicly burnt a Torah scroll um, on this date, on the 17th of the month of Tammuz. That's at least according to Josephus. There's another explanation that this is a reference to the Torah scroll that was used in the post-Bar Kokhba rebellion to kill Rabbeinu Hanania ben Tardan. Rabbi Hanania ben Tardan was a Tana. He was a sage of the Mishnah who was put to death for sedition, for teaching Torah publicly in the post-Bar Kokhba rebellion. And they killed him by wrapping him up with Sifrei Torah and burning him. There's another explanation that some historians give that this apostomus is actually a reference to an individual who lived during the time of Antiochus, the Greek emperor of the Syrian Greeks who lived during the time of the Hanukkah story. So there are all sorts of important events that took place on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. But as far as framing the 3 weeks and what they're all about, there are two historical events that come into focus that really are I don't want to say the highlight of this date, but are the most important factors in characterizing this period of time. The first of which is that Jerusalem lay under siege during the time of the Babylonians, and it was on the 17th of the month of Tammuz they could no longer obtain sacrificial animals. And so, for the first time in over 1,000 years, the korbanos, the daily sacrifices, the continual offerings, came to a discontinuation. They ceased being offered. So we see right away that Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is associated with the destruction of the temple. But the truth is that the most important aspect of the day, the most important event of the day, actually takes place in the second temple period, and this is why we fast. This is probably the most important historical event for the 17th of the month of Tammuz, and this sets up the 3 weeks for us. It was on this day that the Romans breached the walls of Jerusalem when they were besieging the city during the Great Rebellion that precipitated the destruction of the temple. So on the 17th of the month of Tammuz, the walls of Jerusalem were breached, which means that the rebelling Jews were no longer able to defend themselves. The Romans were able to take control of the city, which culminated with the destruction of the temple on the evening of the 9th of Av, where the fire continued to burn and the Beis Hamikdash continued to be destroyed into the 10th of the 10th of Av. So the 3 weeks begin with Shivas B'Tammuz, with the breach of the walls, and we're mourning the destruction of the temple and the loss of Jewish hegemony and premier and as the premier occupants of the land of Israel, with the breach of the walls of Jerusalem on the 17th of the month of Tammuz. That continue and which continues on until the 9th of the month of Tammuz, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So, in essence, these days draw us to focus on the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of the temple, and more specifically, the second temple. All the halachic authorities ask the question, well, when the Babylonians were besieging the city, the walls were breached on the 9th of Tammuz, I believe it is, not on the 17th. So why is it that we focus on the second temple period and when the walls were breached? Why is the 17th of the month of Tammuz the day that we fast? Why is it we mark the second temple more than the first? Well, because just in terms of chronology, the second temple is a lot closer to us, and the experiences that we have as a nation in exile began essentially with this date. Therefore, Shivos B'Tammuz and destruction of the second temple is a much more poignant event, and that's why on this day specifically we mourn and we fast. So Shivos B'Tammuz it sets off a period of 3 weeks that we focus on the destruction of the temple. Now, it's very important to note that many of the rituals of mourning that we have, according to, the absolute minimum halachic standards, the standards that you find in the Talmud itself, all the rituals of mourning that we observe over the course of these 3 weeks, and we're going to be discussing what they are only absolutely mandatory on the very week that Tisha B'Av, in which Tisha B'Av, falls. Minhag Ashkenazi Jewry have expanded the rituals of mourning to begin not only from Rosh Chodesh Av, when we experience or when we observe a much heightened form of mourning, but we've expanded mourning to also include the period of time that starts with Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, filling up this entire expanse, this entire 3 week period. So when we talk about mourning and the rituals of mourning that we observe, there are specifically 4 forms of mourning that we have taken on as a community that we observe from Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the 17th of the month of Tammuz, until the until Tisha B'Av. And the 4 practices that we have are refraining from joyous activities like celebrations, which means weddings, which is a very, very joyous, very momentous, very happy occasion. We don't get married at this time. We don't sing, we don't listen to music, we don't dance, we don't do anything that is considered to be celebratory in general, and we'll qualify what exactly that means. So that's one form of mourning, which we don't celebrate at this time. Another form of mourning that we observe during these 3 weeks is to not shave or not take a haircut. Getting a haircut is considered to be, something that is it's an enjoyable experience. It's a noteworthy experience. As a result, we don't shave, we don't get haircuts during this 3 week period. We do not say the bracha of Shehechianu, a bracha that you say when you, for example, buy a new article of clothing or when you have a new piece of fruit. And we also refrain from activities that might be considered dangerous. And we'll explain and we'll go through each and every single one of these items, one of these practices that we have. So let's talk about not getting married during this time and other joyous and joyful activities. As I mentioned earlier, we generally do not, according to the very baseline of halacha, there's nothing that prohibits us from getting married except during the actual week in which Tisha B'Av occurs. However, again, as mentioned earlier, the practice has been expanded that we do not get married at all during this 3 week period. We refrain from making weddings at this time. Now, that said, if we find ourselves in a circumstance or in a situation where a mitzvah will be performed, not every wedding is necessarily considered the same quality of a mitzvah. If you have a young man and a young woman, neither of which have been married before, for those individuals, that's considered to be an incredibly important occasion. It's considered to be a very great mitzvah. There are circumstances in which we would allow for a wedding to take place at that time, and we're much more lenient in those circumstances. But in general, we still do discourage weddings from taking place during the course of the 3 weeks. Now, what about an engagement party? Would an engagement party be allowed? Okay, we're not going to get married, but can people like, have what's called a vort, inviting friends and family over to say l'chaim? And the answer is yes, we are allowed to make a vort. We are allowed to, gather and ask our friends to come over. We are allowed to say l'chaim. We can serve some refreshments as well. But that being said, while we can get engaged at this time, there are still restrictions on the kind of celebration that we have. It cannot be a celebratory engagement party. So what do I mean? It means that we don't sing and we don't play music. Perhaps you want to keep it low key also in general. You're not going to perhaps serve a 7-layer cake. Maybe you'll serve some cookies. You're going to sort of diminish the nature or the celebratory nature of the engagement party, but the engagement party is still permissible as long as we're not turning it into this sort of full-blown party with music and with dancing. The party can take place, but just no music and no dancing. Some people would argue, well, then it's not a party. And yeah, that's exactly the way it is. It's not a party if there's no music and dancing. You're just praising Hashem and and saying Mazel Tov to one another. Now, what about a bris milah? Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, we can have a wedding if there is a mitzvah involved. And when we find ourselves like with the bris milah, we do have a mitzvah here. And unlike a wedding, which you can schedule for a different date, a bris you cannot schedule for a different date. So the bris is going to take place. The bris we cannot schedule for a time after the 3 weeks. And because it is a mitzvah celebration, we also do allow for dancing and for singing at a bris milah. When we're coming together to perform a mitzvah, even during the 3 weeks, we are allowed to sing, we are allowed to dance, we are allowed to celebrate. Generally, we try to schedule these things for other times, but when it comes to a mitzvah like a bris, which cannot be scheduled for a different time, we do allow for the celebration to take place. And because there's a mitzvah involved, it sort of allows us to obviate the morning practices at this time, at least for that very moment. Now, what about a Sheva Brachos? Sheva Brachos are much the same thing. You get married before Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and you're still marking the 7 days of celebration that follows the wedding. And yes, it's much like a bris milah. You are allowed to have a Sheva Brachos, and it can be more celebratory than a vort. We said that there can be no dancing or no music. But when it comes to a Sheva Brachos, we are allowed to dance. Again, when you're just gathering together for a voluntary celebration, we say don't do that. Don't have a voluntary celebration. Make it less celebratory. Don't make it a celebration. Have your engagement party without it being a party. But if you're gathering together for the performance of a mitzvah, then it can be celebratory, and we do allow for dancing. Now, birthday parties are much the same way. Birthday parties, obviously, you cannot play music, you cannot dance because it's not a mitzvah, but it's a celebration that cannot be pushed off. And so, therefore, just like an engagement party, you can invite friends and family together. You can sit down and have a meal. You can have cake. You can perhaps sing happy birthday, but we're not going to dance and we're not going to play music. So we're going to turn this party and make it a non-party by removing the music. If there's a mitzvah involved, then you're allowed to have dancing and then you're allowed to have singing. All right. Now, in general, when it comes to music, we say that during the 3 weeks as a way of sort of marking the sad occasion, we don't listen to music. And the halacha is that we don't listen to music and we don't dance at all over the course of the 3 weeks. The question that the halachic authorities get very involved with is, what about recorded music? Is recorded music permitted? And you will find that amongst the, what's that? Is that considered? We'll get to a bar mitzvah soon. Don't worry. What about recorded music? And a person listen to recorded music. So if a person is wants to, I don't know, they're very attached to Pachelbel's canon, and they just want to listen to some Handel. The harmonious blacksmith is their thing. They rock to the Four Seasons. So you have are you allowed to listen to those recordings? You're not going to the symphony. You're not going to the you're not going to the you're not listening to live music. Is that permitted? And in general, most contemporary halachic authorities say that we don't really distinguish between recorded music and non-recorded music. Music has that capacity to sort of really bring out a person's joy. It can be an elative experience, and as such, even recorded music is also restricted during this time, and it's particularly difficult for me. I mean, I have a very eclectic taste in music. I listen to a lot of chazanos, and there's certain parts of the music that when you hear the person's the Kopfstimmer being done with an incredible amount of ease and skill. That's a falsetto for the uninitiated. Um, like when Yossel Rosenblatt is able to go in and out of it with an incredible mastery, it just sends chills down your spine. Really sends chills down my spine. It's a very powerful experience, and that's exactly what we're trying to avoid during the 3 weeks. It brings great joy, and as a result, we just don't do it. Go ahead. Yes, Eugene. Okay. Well, well, it gets a little bit complicated. So, Rabbi First, Posick in Chicago, um, always said, singing a cappella was fine. But then somebody explained to him that, you can listen to the Maccabees, for example, and they have it down to an art where they're able to sing in such a way that you don't miss the music, the instrument accompaniment. They're mimicking the sounds of the instruments to some extent, or they're harmonizing to a greater degree. So you don't notice it. But first was of the opinion that even that kind of a cappella music is still forbidden because it accomplishes the same thing that music does. In that it can bring that joy and elation. But that's Rabbi First. Not everybody is of that opinion. I personally don't listen to that music. I will listen to single voices. So I have a lot of old European rabbis singing old European nigunim. Again, with my eclectic taste in music that I will listen to, but it's a single voice singing a single song, and I'm usually doing it to learn the tune. Which is different than listening to gain enjoyment, which often is what the Maccabees are doing. So there are halachic opinions that do allow for it. There are Rabbi First is one who does not. I personally don't listen to it, but if you do, and if you do listen to it, just know that there are legitimate halachic authorities that say that that's acceptable and that is permitted. Um, all right. What are some exceptions to this? Excuse me. Music that's not being played for the sake of enjoyment. That you don't have to avoid those things. So, for example, if a person is in an elevator, you don't have to say, and there's an elevator plays music. I don't even know if elevator is still, if elevator music is still a thing. But elevators that play music, you don't have to take the stairs. You can take the elevator. You're not there to listen to the music. You're there to take the elevator. Music just seems to happen around you. The same thing is true in an office, and the same thing is also true in a mall or in a supermarket, though I haven't heard a supermarket play music in a very long time, but they used to do that. That was a thing, Zevi, when I was your age. They still do it. I've not heard a supermarket play music. Okay. Um, yeah, if you're not there to listen to the music, you're there to shop, but you happen to hear music, there's no obligation for you to stay away. You're not there to listen to the music, you're not listening to the music for enjoyment. It's just happening around you. There's no problem with that. Similarly, also, if a person is listening to music, but he's not listening to music or she's not listening to music for the purposes of enjoyment, rather it's filling an actual purpose. So, for example, sea shanties. I'm a blue noser. Me and Jennifer, we have to stand tall for the Maritimes. So when you sing a sea shanty, what's a sea shanty trying to do? It's trying to coordinate movement. When you have a bunch of people who are pulling or trying to hoist the sail, everybody has to be pulling at the same time. So a sea shanty is a song that they would sing in order to maintain a rhythm so that people are pulling together at the same moment, at the same time, so that you don't sort of divide and you don't divide people's energies and waste people's time and strength. The music is perhaps being played in order to keep a rhythm so that work can be done. The same thing is true if you're going to be playing music to keep a rhythm as you jog or as you exercise. That is also acceptable. The music is not there for the purpose of enjoyment. The music is there to fill an actual function or for a different purpose. Therefore, it is not forbidden. You may listen to music under those circumstances. The same thing also with regards to music you might want to play to calm children down. Teacher can sing and can dance with young school children. And similarly, also, the ring one does not have to turn off their ringtone during the 3 weeks. It's telling you that you have a phone call. You're not listening to it because it gives you enjoyment. Very few people have ringtones that they say, "Oh, I'm so happy that my phone just rang because I just love listening to that song." That's just not a thing that people do or say. So you don't have to worry about it. All right. Now, similarly, also about professional musicians. If somebody, it's their livelihood to play music, there's no problem playing the music. You're not playing the music for enjoyment. You're doing it to make it because to perform your job. Similarly, also, if a person teaches, a person gives music lessons, that's also not precluded. That's also not forbidden during the 9 days. Again, for the same reason, you're not playing and you're not teaching the music because you love the music. You might love music, but you're not doing it at that moment for your personal enjoyment. You're doing it for the purpose of being able to earn a livelihood. That would be acceptable. Now, if one is practicing because it's their profession, everyone agree that it's acceptable to do it during the 3 weeks. If it's not for their profession, let's say a person volunteers on for an orchestra, Ramosha Feinstein was of the opinion that it would not be permitted. Practicing voluntarily is not forbidden, according to Ramosha Feinstein. Other people do disagree, and so if you find yourself sort of wanting to volunteer for an orchestra or for a band, and you need to practice, come and talk with me. We'll talk through it, and we'll figure it out. Music lessons for children are also permitted. No child wants to play the piano. That's, it's just the law of, it's the law of music lessons for kids. The kids, they're doing it because the parents are telling them to. They're not enjoying it. Perfectly fine. They're not doing it for personal enjoyment. Okay, so those are the sorts of things that we associated with joy, celebration. Music is considered to be a form of celebration, and as a result, all of these things are prohibited unless we can categorize it as being done not for the sake of enjoyment, but rather for any other purpose. Then music in many of these cases would be permitted. All right, now that concludes celebration. What about haircuts? What are the laws? What are the rules about haircuts? It's not permissible to shave or get a haircut during the 3 weeks. That said, however, one is allowed to comb their hair, even though it's a definite outcome that the comb will pluck a hair. That's not a problem. Nobody goes to work and say, "Hey, do you like my new hairstyle? I combed it and it pulled out enough hair that it now changed the way it looks." That just doesn't happen. That's not how people operate, and that therefore there's no issue with that at all. Cutting nails is also permitted during the 3 weeks. We'll talk perhaps when we get to the 9 days, things do change. Okay. Then it's a little bit different, but during the 3 weeks, cutting nails and cutting is acceptable. Now this is true. The minhag that we practice is that there is no difference between men and there's no difference with regards to women when it comes to the 3 weeks. We don't go to the salon, we don't get our hair cut. And I would actually argue that it's probably a bigger deal for a woman to get a haircut than a man, primarily because when a man gets a haircut, it's usually always the exact same haircut. Women change their hairstyle and it becomes a big deal. It's kind of like getting a new suit. Like, a man gets a new suit, it's not a big deal. It's just another suit, same as the old suit. When a woman buys a new dress, say this is a father of a daughter and husband of a wife, buying new clothes is always a much bigger deal so it probably would be more of an imperative for one to say that probably that women should not be getting their haircut during the 3 weeks. But that said, if there is an issue of modesty, like an issue of tznius, and you need to cut the hair in order to preserve that stance. Let's say, for example, my wife often has this as a problem. She wears a wig, and if her hair gets too long, she can't keep her hair under the wig. It comes out. And so, as far as my wife is concerned, that's a matter of modesty. My wife would be allowed to cut her hair to preserve modesty. We do say that that is permitted. Also, cutting hair in order to be able to go to the mikveh is likewise allowed. We're saying that when a person is not cutting their hair to change their style, rather they're cutting their hair for a for some of these other purposes, that is acceptable. Let's say a person is an athlete, wants to shave other parts of their body. We do say that that is permitted during the 3 weeks. It's only hair on the head that's subject to these prohibitions. Other hair on the body is not subject to the 3 week prohibition, and one can shave and one can cut those other hairs. Except when it comes to a man, man doesn't shave his beard. All right. When it comes to a sheitel, my wife wears a sheitel, so fixing and cutting a sheitel is acceptable during the 3 weeks, not during the 9 days, at least according to Rush Shmuel first. The custom is to not give haircuts to children of any age, but we do say that children under the age of 6 years old, in cases of major need, it is permissible in cases of major need for children under age 6. If you find yourself in such a situation, give me a call and we'll talk about it. Now, what are some exceptions? What are some of the exceptions of which we would say that a person is allowed to shave their beard, or if they don't grow a beard, shave their face or cut their hair? Well, if it's being done to celebrate a mitzvah. So if you recall, we said a moment ago that we don't party except that there's a mitzvah involved. So that would mean like having a bris. We said before, you can throw a party in celebration of a bris. The same thing also applies to haircuts and shaving. The individuals who are celebrating the bris, the father, the sandak, the moel, they can shave the day of the bris. They can also get a haircut, preferably the day of the bris. If you can't get it the day of the bris, you can do it the day before. But in general, we try to do things on the same day. And definitely that's true with regards to shaving your beard or shaving your face. You should shave the day of. We also say that a chassan and kala, let's say a couple gets married the day before Shivas B'Tammuz. They're married before the 3 weeks began, and so now they're experiencing. They're celebrating their sheva brachos. During the extent of the sheva brachos, the groom and the bride are allowed to shave and are allowed to cut their hair. Now we said also that when it comes to a pidyon ben, also the father of the child may not take a haircut in honor of the simcha. That's where we differentiate between a pidyon ben and a bris. Even though it's a mitzvah, we don't allow for a haircut for a pidyon ben. Now, what about work? So it's actually funny. So I was going through some of these halachos, and the rabbi who I studied with in a previous life actually used to work for the Foreign Service in the United States. So he's a rabbi now, but he used to work for the Foreign Office in the security department, and he was part of the security detail that oversaw the security of foreign diplomats when they came to the United States. And I was talking to him about the dress code that they had to abide by. And yeah, they had a dress code. He was not allowed to grow any kind of facial hair when he was working on when he worked in his field. Judy, do you remember Rabbi Moshe Ephros?
Yeah, sure.
Right. So Rabbi Moshe Ephros, I study with a couple days a week.
Oh,
So he used to work for the Foreign Office. So you can always tell from his bearing that he worked with foreign dignitaries. He has this very regal way of speaking, of behaving. Um,
huh.
and he still shaves to this day. Maybe now he has a beard, but he had to but he was never allowed to shave as part of his job. If he did, he would lose his job. And it's not just people who work in those kinds of official capacities. It's not just people who work for the RCMP who have restrictions on facial hair. The truth is that in many professions, maybe less so now, growing a beard is not socially acceptable, and a person could potentially stand to, pass on a promotion or maybe even lose their job for growing facial hair. In that case, we say that a person is allowed to shave during the 3 weeks. We do not place any restrictions on them. We don't say you have to lose your job in order to properly mourn the Beis Hamikdash. All right. If a person need, if a, for health reasons, a person needs to, cut their hair, maybe a surgery has to be performed, and they have to cut the hair out of the way. We say that is permissible. A person is allowed to also, trim their mustache if it gets in the way of eating. Not too many of us here in Calgary have mustaches. I do, and yeah, it can sometimes get in the way. So if it's getting in the way, if it interferes with eating, you are allowed to trim it and cut it back. If a person, experienced a bereavement and their 30-day period of mourning comes to a conclusion during the 3 weeks, which means that for the preceding 30 days, they could not get a haircut. For those individuals, we say that since it was halachically forbidden to cut your hair until this point, they are allowed to cut their hair during the 3 weeks. And so again, so a person who's coming out of their shloshim, coming out of their 30 days, during the 3 weeks, that individual, since it was halakhically forbidden for them to get a haircut before that point, they are allowed to cut their hair during the 3 weeks. All right, so that covers the second part of the 3 weeks rituals of mourning. What was the second one rather? What was the third ritual of mourning that we observe during the 3 weeks? The bracha of Shechianu. It's our minhag to not say the bracha of Shechianu during the 3 weeks, and that also means we do not make the kinds of purchases that would precipitate saying the bracha of Shechianu. That said, not every Thanksgiving blessing is precluded during the 3 weeks. There is another form of Thanksgiving blessing that's called the bracha of Hatov v'Hametiv. That is not subject to a prohibition during the 3 weeks. So where would that come up? So if you've ever had a Shabbos meal with me, um, and you'll know that we often serve a l'chaim after we have fish, before we have something that's fleishes, before we have meat. There's a halacha that says you're supposed to wash your mouth out. You're supposed to eat something like have a bite of bread, and to say l'chaim after you have fish. And to clear out whatever it is that the fish does from your mouth, so that when you're eating the meat, it's not you're not there's no fish present in your in your mouth. So sometimes, if I have it available, I will also offer port wine. Now, port wine is often a better wine than the one that I said kiddush on. I'm not going to say kiddush on port, because port will run you 20% alcohol by volume, and it's kind of boozy, and I'd rather not be shikker the entire Suda. So I'll say kiddush on wine, regular wine, and then I'll have a shot of a l'chaim of port after I have fish. Because the port is a better wine, there's a special bracha that you make, the bracha of Hatov v'Hametiv. Blessed is Hashem, who is good and who does good. That you are allowed to say during the 3 weeks. So that would mean that if I'm having wine during the 3 weeks, then somebody brings out a better bottle of wine, I'm allowed to make this bracha, even though we do not say the bracha of Shechianu during this time. That said, saying the bracha of Shechianu for a mitzvah purpose is permissible. So, for example, if I'm doing a mitzvah, like I'm making a pidyon haben, if I'm making a pidyon haben where I make a bracha of Shechianu, I would say the bracha of Shechianu. You're saying Shechianu for a mitzvah purpose. But we also say that a person may make the Shechianu bracha on Shabbos. And we'll explain. Like, for example, when it comes to buying clothing. Now, I can't speak to what rabbis in the past year have told you about when to say a Shechianu, but I'll talk about what I tell people to do, and I'll talk about my own personal practice. Because we live in a clothing rich society, buying a new article of clothing is not that big a deal. So if I buy a new shirt or if I buy a new pair of pants, I do not make the bracha of Shechianu. However, a new suit is more noteworthy. It's not something that I buy with great regularity. It's generally something that I do every couple years. Therefore, buying a new suit or a new dress, a new nice article of clothing, that would have the bracha of Shechianu associated with it. So because we live in a clothing rich society, I do not say a Shechianu on most articles of clothing, but I do say Shechianu I would say Shechianu on a new dress. Not that I would buy or wear a new dress, but I would buy and wear a new suit. I would say a Shechianu. And for that reason, I would not buy a suit during the 3 weeks, but perhaps I would buy maybe some other articles of clothing, because there's no Shechianu bracha associated with them. Um, According to everybody, socks and underwear may be purchased because one does not say a shehecheyanu on articles of clothing that are there just to keep your sweat off your body. Our minhag is to make a shehecheyanu on a new talis gadol, like the big ones that we purchase, that we buy, that we wear during tefillah, not the one that we wear under our clothing all day long. Therefore, for this reason, because we make a shehecheyanu on a talis, one should refrain from buying a new talis during the 3 weeks. Um, Again, what am I saying? What I'm saying is that we do not make the kinds of purchases that would precipitate making a shechianu bracha. But purchases that would not precipitate making a shechianu are not restricted during the 3 weeks period. Similarly, also buying new fruit. Um, new fruit, a piece of fruit that you've not had yet that year that is seasonal and it's not available during other times of the year. That kind of fruit you say a shehecheyanu on when you purchase and consume it. One should not buy that kind of a fruit during the 3 weeks. So if that means that if a person has not had yet cherries during the season, they should not buy cherries during the 3 weeks because that might precipitate in saying a shehecheyanu. You're shaking your head no. What, not buying cherries? But that said, oh, the humanity is right. If you will pass on that year's crop of cherries, because all the cherries will be sold and there'll be no more cherries for another year, if you're never gonna, and so therefore the entire year of your years of your year's cherries will then be ruined. You are allowed to purchase them and eat them. That's right. That's right.
Some of them they last a very short period.
Yeah, that's right. But we do say shechianu on Shabbos, so you can eat the fruit on Shabbos, even in some of these other occasions, other situations. If Okay, making very large purchases, like buying a new car, that can precipitate a shechianu. For example, a person's not buying a family car, car your mini your like it happened to me. We were a family of five happily driving in a sedan. And then we had a baby, and no longer a sedan would work for us because now we have four kids. We needed to buy a bigger car. So you're buying a bigger car. That's not a pleasure purchase. That's a practical purchase. You are allowed to buy that during the 3 weeks. But let's say, for example, you're suffering your midlife crisis, and you say, you know what, I need my red convertible. That's not the kind of purchase you make during the 3 weeks. We do not make those large purchases for pleasurable reasons during the 3 weeks. So if you're going to have your midlife crisis, wait 3 weeks until after the 10th of Av before you buy your red convertible. All right. Um, Buying a new home, buying a new home is a lot different. Now, perhaps at one point in time, buying a new home was buying an affordable home was not a mitzvah. Therefore, perhaps at one point in time, people would say, don't buy a home during the 3 weeks. But but nowadays, because um, because finding affordable homes is so difficult, if you find an affordable home during the 3 weeks, grab it if you can. Take it. Yes, we don't like making large purchases. Especially getting a purchase like a new home could be viewed as something that's for a pleasurable reason. It's a pleasurable reason. Perhaps it's not in keeping with the theme of the Yom Tov. It's not the theme of the season. That said, still, much like shaving during the 3 weeks. If you're going to lose your job, you shave. If you're not going to have the opportunity to purchase an affordable home otherwise, or you don't buy, go ahead, buy it during the 3 weeks. We don't make a stink about it. Now, potentially dangerous activities. One should refrain from activities that have a measure of danger to them. We view this time as an inauspicious time when all sorts of potential misfortunes could befall us. Don't place yourself in a situation where there's a possibility that misfortune could befall you. For example, don't take an elective surgery this time if you can avoid it now in Calgary, in Canada, in general, Alberta. If some surgeries, if you don't take them then and there, you may not, you might have to wait another uh, number of months before it's a possibility, before it's available again. So it might be a bit different. But let's say like, LASIK surgery to be able to see, to remove your glasses prescription. Yeah, I probably shouldn't do things like that on during the 3 weeks. Person should not be swimming in rivers or deep water. And air travel is permitted if it's for a business related reason, but if it's just to go on a trip, if it's just to go on vacation, then perhaps the 3 weeks is not the time to go traveling. All right, we'll stop here and we'll continue next week with the 9 days. But I am open now to questions, comments, or rebuttals, and I'll stop the recording.